Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Eskom and the National Transmission Company South Africa briefed lawmakers this week. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss some of the themes that emerged. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
The Transmission Development Plan and its implementation received attention.
Yes, it's a big issue in South Africa. We know that the lack of grid investment over the last number of years, as Eskom has really focused on building really large power stations, getting that build program over the line. We know they're still struggling to finalise Kusile. It hasn't been finished, but it's getting there. And Madupi took many, many years. The transmission and distribution side of the business didn't get the attention, the capital and the projects that's needed to really keep ahead of the game in terms of what we need to do to connect new generation to the grid. And it came to the head where we, in bid window 6 of the renewables program, weren't able to connect or allow any of the wind projects to reach preferred bidder status because Eskom said that the grid was congested in those areas. There have been some changes in the way Eskom will manage the grid, and curtailment's been introduced to allow such projects at a certain level to come in. So that has helped a bit, but ultimately we need to build new grid capacity, and the pace still is of concern. And I think it will remain a concern after this briefing because we're doing sort of less than 300 kilometres every year of, for instance, power lines. That's the big visible item. There's obviously a lot of transformers going in as well, but that visibility, high visibility power line aspect, going at 300 kilometres a year is just not at a pace that we need. And it really almost has to be a sort of a hockey stick type of trajectory to get us to the sort of level where we want to build 14,500 by mid-2030s. So, we need to pick up the pace to getting over 2,000 kilometres a year by the end of this decade. So there's a concern, we're not really going at the pace that we need to be going at. And there's also this whole issue around the financing of the NTCSA, which has been sort of legally separated now, but not fully unbundled from Eskom, and whether it's got the balance sheet to do what it needs to do. Then we know that they've put in an appeal through the tariff application. Part of that is for the NTCSA and its build program. So there's a number of loose ends at the moment. Also on the whole contracting side, do we have the steel fabrication in place? We know that we don't have the large transformer manufacturing capability, so panels are being set up with international factories to tender out for those. The acquisition of land and getting the servitude right, that's a major issue. Can they do this without expropriation? All these issues are still balls in the air and are delaying the rollout. But we need this rollout, and we need to have this rollout at a far accelerated pace. And I think that was sort of the message, that we need to have a step change.
Was any insight given regarding the private sector participation in the grid?
Again, that's another ball left hanging in the air. National Treasury and the Electricity Minister are very keen for private sector participation in this space. The NTCSA, with its balance sheet concerns, is a little bit worried what it means, the implications of sort of a build, operate, own and transfer scheme might have on its balance sheet. They don't want it to reflect as a liability. It seems to be a very low risk liability, but be that as it may, they're still concerned. So they're looking at a whole lot of other instruments, ones that aren't really tested really internationally or well known. They talk about a build transfer, which is really an engineering, procure, construct type plus financing scheme. I'm not sure what appetite there will be for that. There will definitely be much more appetite for a sort of boot or BOT type arrangement, but we haven't got over the line yet in terms of the model. We are far more progressed from protecting the National Treasury balance sheet, because there's a credit guarantee scheme coming in there. There's been a lot of work that's been done with the World Bank Group, and that instrument hasn't been launched, but I think it's just about ready to be announced. and to be canvassed more broadly, but it basically allows Treasury to move ahead without adding to its contingent liability load, which it's nervous to do. But on the NTCSA side, I don't think we've quite ticked that box yet. So both on the pace at which the actual building's taking place and the capacity in the country, and the fact that we've had all the stop-start, and that's really affected sort of capacity for power line construction and for substation manufacturing. And then also on the sort of financial end, I think we haven't quite got over the line, and that's we do need that. We do need that certainty if we're going to start building at the pace and scale that we need.
Eskom also wants to continue to play a big role in generation.
Yes, and I think that's also an interesting development. They've been talking about this 22 gigawatt pipeline that they have in sort of cleaner energy. We know that they're a coal utility. We also know that a lot of their coal units are old and are being scheduled for decommissioning. They got a bit of a reprieve there during the peak of load shedding, where they could delay the decommissioning of certain units that were supposed to come off by 2025. They gave that reprieve until 2030. That comes with costs, but extending it beyond, some of those beyond the 2030 doesn't look feasible financially at all. So Eskom is already scheduling sort of up over 10 gigawatts to come off by 2031. That gap has to be closed. We know that the private sector's got huge appetite. There's been a lot of private sector activity. There's the public procurement, which has been a bit more sort of unsteady since it resumed. But there's also that procurement underway. But Eskom seems, for their generation business, which is also going to be unbundled, wants to be a player, remain a player. So they told parliamentarians this week, look, this is the decommissioning that we're going to see to 2040, and we would like to grow our business with a very different mix, including wind, solar, battery storage, pumped storage, nuclear, as well as a lot of gas to power. That's what we would like to do. And they gave this sort of aspirational vision of Eskom remaining a major part of the generation mix into the future.
Is this generation investment strategy credible?
Well, it's not yet at all, because it comes without a funding plan. Obviously, there's some aspects of it. They've got OCGTs that there's a lot of talk about converting those into gas-fired power stations, and they do have some replacement capacity happening from a solar perspective. We know both Letabo and Komati, there's tenders out in the market at the moment. That's fairly small scale. And then they have this big ministerial determination for a 3 gigawatt gas to power project in Richards Bay. But that isn't funded. So until there's a clear funding plan, and we know that Eskom, with in parallel the hearings on the tariffs taking place, has a funding problem still, and is going to battle, I think, to get a number of these projects. And the issue is, can they do this cheaper than the private sector? Because we want the cheapest electricity as possible. So they have to show a credible funding plan for this to make it credible. Also, whether they should be such a large participant in the generation space in the future. We're in a system where you can have more competition, and more competition is emerging. And we see the desperation of miners and manufacturers to get green energy in particular, so they're moving ahead. They can't wait for Eskom to decommissioning. They have to move ahead, and they are. So it's going to be interesting. Eskom, yes, that they've got new confidence. They've got a generation pedigree, and they want to remain in business. But whether they should be sort of 77 gigawatts of the system in 2040 is a question. Maybe it needs to be a little bit smaller than that. And also where they fit in precisely and where that expertise can be applied best also has to be seen. So I think just a make Eskom great again strategy from a generation perspective, I don't think is advisable in this sort of current changing context where other finance, other expertise, other companies can close a lot of the gap. Where we can't close the gap is really on that transmission and distribution side, and there we really need Eskom to rise to come to the party and to raise their game. And we are only talking about transmission. We need the same very much on the distribution side, and really we're seeing that's lagging quite majorly, both from the unbundling perspective in Eskom, but we can see what's happening at the municipal level. There is where we really need the government and the state to take a lead, I think, in helping to sort out that sector. It looks very fragile. It's emerged clearly as the weakest link in the whole supply chain, value chain for electricity. And I think that has to be the focus of the National Energy Crisis Committee now.
Thank you. That's the second Tech Show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily email newsletter.